All right, welcome. I'm here with Dan Clark, and Dan, I'm going to get right to the heart of it. I've known this about you for a long time now, but you basically had the chance to go to the edge of space and back.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. Let's start there, because as an extreme sports lover and somebody who just loves to do extreme activities with life, you kind of have one up me on just about everything that I've done. But so you went to the edge of space, and I want to hear how that experience was.
You know, if I could give a little preamble to the answer to that question, just because this is Jimmy Rex, you're the most connected guy I know, but I think you've created networking at the highest level. You've created it into a system. I think there's an art and a science of figuring out how to influence the affluent, and Jimmy Rex is the expert. I look to you for guidance. I watch you. You inspire me as a young man. And the reason why I bring that up is because so many of my fellow colleagues as professional speakers, when they hear my once in a lifetime stories that I have every Tuesday, they always say, hey, that stuff never happens to me. And my question is always, why not? You know, what's on your bucket list? And who do you really want to interview? We hear about the 6 degrees of separation, and I really believe it's like 3 or 4 degrees of separation. And if you have a list of whom you want to interview, who's inspired you in your life that you want to actually have a one-on-one belly-to-belly conversation with? The process is, who do you know who can introduce you to someone who can introduce you to the President of the United States, to Sheikh Nahyan, United Arab Emirates, one of our family friends. And I think Jimmy Rex, I think you've figured that out. I don't think you've quantified it to the point that I'm alluding to, but we can talk about that off camera.
That sounds good. Well, you know,
because I was invited to sort of the edge of space because of my networking. I've flown every fighter jet in the Air Force and in the Navy that has 2 seats because they don't let me take off and land. But once I'm airborne in that 90-minute sortie, they give me the stick. And I get to do all the maneuvers, and I get to fly that supersonic fighter jet 30 out of the 90 minutes. I've flown every bomber. I've been downrange entertaining the troops 8 different times on military tribute tours because of my networking. I've given over 350 free speeches just to the United States Air Force, and have donated over 3,000 of my own hours. And when a commanding officer, when a 4-star general knows what my speaker's fee is, and they know how I have really tried to live my life in a way that I put service before self in as an everyday thought and behavior, eventually they say, Clark, what can we do for you? And I'm like, I want to ride an F-18. I want to ride with the Thunderbirds. I flew with the Thunderbirds, did the air show. And so consequently, I run into General Paul McGillicuddy, whom I'd spoken for so many times when he was the commander, the base commander at Maxwell Air Force Base Air University in Montgomery, Alabama. And I'd done so many things for him and his wife in the spouses program. And all of a sudden, 2 years later, I run into him in the halls of the Pentagon. His call sign is Pickle McGillicuddy. I said, Pickle, what are you doing here? Oh my gosh, I'm a 2-star general now, blah, blah, blah. I said, congratulations, what's your next assignment? He says, I'm going to Beale Air Force Base outside of Sacramento. Will you come and speak to our troops? And I'm like, yeah, if you'll give me a ride in a U-2 reconnaissance spy plane. He goes, we can do that. Well, in order to get a ride in a U-2 and go to the edge of space, we had to actually have to get a signature from the President of the United States.
Oh, wow.
And then the 4-star General Chief of Staff, and then to General McGillicuddy. People go, well, how did you pull that off? Well, I'm saying, why can't you pull that off? And so I soared to the edge of space, and quickly, because it's a classified mission, and you can go to my 15-minute documentary on YouTube, Dan Clark Spy Plane, and it shows my training. I had to lose 37 pounds to go into space. And because it's classified, we could only say it was a 3.5-hour sortie, even though it was 5. And we can say we only went to 70,000 feet because I had my video camera inside the cockpit watching the altimeter tick off past 70,000. I had to turn it off. But just for our conversation here, which I've bogarted the entire time from one question, bro.
I love it.
At 70,000 feet, you see 2/3 of the state of California. At 80,000 feet above the Earth's surface, you see mapped outlines of America. And at 90,000 feet, you tear up and believe you can reach out and touch the face of God. So for 5 hours, I sat in the sounds of silence, looking at the curvature of the Earth, gazing into the endless blackness of space, pondering eternity, and it changed my life forever. And when we landed, I had to figure out the lessons learned so I can share them in my speeches. Otherwise, it's just a self-contained story that no one can benefit from. But because I'm a professional speaker, I've enjoyed trying to figure out how to distill life lessons from that experience that really have changed my life, that will change your life too.
Well, I love it. Well, can you share a few of those life lessons from that particular experience? Because I believe, like you, I think life is full of moments, right? I think that it's a collection of moments, and we should every day thrive to create those moments in our life. And what you said is people mistake, like they think that life just happens for certain people. You have to go out and create. You have to do it by design. And that's something that I preach all the time. It's like, this one of my buddies is like, he'll always ask me what's going on. It's like, oh, we're in LA doing whatever cool experience comes up. And it becomes like a weekly thing where you just have cool things happening, but it's all by design in some way or form. And I think that's where people get mistaken, is they think that just, there's certain people that have lucky experiences. And I love that you said is like, no, I networked in it. I worked this, I made this happen.
Yeah. And we live in a cause and effect world. There is no such law called luck. There is no such universal law called coincidence. And the reason why people flippantly call it luck, you're lucky, or this is a coincidence, is because they haven't taken the time to drill deep enough to figure out where the cause is. And let's just talk sales, for example, tying into Jimmy Rex, one of the greatest sales professionals on the planet. No one likes to be
my new commercial.
No one likes to be sold, but we all like to buy. And the definition of sales is the transference of trust. And so if we want to create experiences in our lives and live our lives on purpose by design, the benefit is detailed in the analytics of a sales professional. One of my great friends, he's since passed away. He was a professor at Notre Dame University in South Bend, Indiana, Dr. Herb True. He was the first one that put analytics on the sales process. And he says that 44% of sales professionals quit after the first sales call, 24% quit after the second sales call, 14% quit after the third sales call, and 12% of sales professionals quit after the fourth sales call. That's 94% of sales professionals who quit by the fourth sales call, and yet 85% of our sales are closed. 85% of our deals are made between the fifth and the 12th sales call. So what we have to do is make ourselves so compelling to be around, so fascinating to talk to, so inspirational to hang out with, that our prospects, our potential customers, feel a level of trust and confidence and excitement to invite us into their circle of influence at least 5 to 12 times, which gives us an opportunity to close the deal. There's a sales process, and then there's a sales presentation. And every sales cycle is a different length in time. It might take you one meeting to sell a wonderful piece of real estate. It might take you 7 meetings to sell that one piece of real estate. So the sales process always changes, but the sales presentation is when you know that it's a formal deal. They know you're going to show up with the contract, with the pen, ready to go.
Well, it's an example of that. Last year, I sold a house up by the Draper Temple. It's a $5 million home. It was the only thing bigger than the temple up there, and the guy, I sold it in about 3 days. I put it on Facebook and it sold, but I had to meet with the guy 11 times. He was interviewing a dozen agents. I met with him 11 times before he finally hired me to be the one to sell his home.
Okay, so let me interrupt and interview Jimmy. What's one of your unique factors that made you stand out, that allowed him to understand the sales is the transference of trust? Throw out one attribute, one quality, one part of the Jimmy Rex package that allowed him to choose you. Remember what Simon Sinek said, who's one of my great friends, one of my colleagues. We have the same publisher at Penguin Random House. And Simon Sinek said, the goal is not to do business with everybody who wants what you have. The goal is to do business only with those who believe what you believe, so they choose you, not just somebody who does what you do. Why do people choose Jimmy Rex?
Well, you know what I discovered a long time ago? Successful people love energy above almost anything else I can bring to the table. And so I have my experience. I've sold 1,800 homes. I can show them I have a master's in real estate development. I take this very serious. I have my sales process. I have the history and all that. But the one thing I always try to do is bring that energy and honesty to the situation. So with me, what happened was he'd had it listed for $11 million. Then he dropped it to $9 million. And then that's when he started interviewing again. And I looked at the numbers. He said, I need this sold in 60 days. He wanted it gone in 2 months. And I said, so in my head, I originally was like, well, 7 million maybe. And then, because it had been at 9. And then every part of me was like, it's not going to sell at 7. It'll sell at 5. And so when I interviewed him, I said, look, you might not pick me just because I'm going to tell you this, but you want it gone in 60 days. It needs to be at 5 million. And he goes, you know what? I agree. Everyone else said 7. And so it was very uncomfortable for me to go. And I was like, there's no way he's going to sell it for 5. But that was the price it needed to be at to sell. And when I put it there, he knew already. He was just waiting for the agent to tell him, the truth.
The transference of trust.
Yeah.
He knew trusted me. You told him something that most realtors wouldn't because they want more of the juice on the back end. Good for you.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, so when we landed from my 5-hour sortie into space, what occurred to me is that everything we can take with us when we die, I had aboard with me on the aircraft. Our education, Jimmy Rex proves that you don't learn to know, you learn to do. Reason leads to conclusions, but it is emotion that leads to action. So I've flown all the fighter jets. When I finished my very first fighter jet experience at Patuxent River, Maryland in an F-18, talk about excitement. I'd never been in one before, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and we did the loops and the aileron rolls. We did everything you can imagine. We went 7.1 Mach. We caught 7.1 Gs and went twice the speed of sound. Mach 2, that's 1,200 miles an hour.
Wow.
Unbelievable experience. And when we finally landed and I put my face back over where it was supposed to be, I asked my pilot, I said, Roto, how did we fly this magnificent F-18? And he said, by feel. I said, what do you mean? He said, you become the plane. I said, what do you mean? He said, when you climbed up that ladder and slid into the cockpit of that F-18, did you strap into the F-18 or did you strap the F-18 onto you? The cockpit was crammed full of gadgets and high-tech gauges, high-tech flying machine, and yet in a high-tech world, we need to overcompensate with high-touch. You go supersonic. You fly a high-performance fighter jet with the right side of your brain. And that control stick that came up out of the floor, we straddled with our knees. It moves 3 inches forward, 3 inches to the left, 3 inches to the right, 5.5 inches backwards. You need only move that control stick 1 inch in either one of those 4 directions, and it completely changes the direction of the aircraft 45 degrees. The difference between good and great is a little bit of extra effort. So the first thing I learned from my excursion into space, my adventure of a lifetime, was that we don't learn to know, we learn to do. We can take our education with us. All the information in the world isn't going to make a person successful. It's like the guy who has 3 PhDs. One in philosophy, one in psychology, one in sociology. He doesn't have a job, but at least he can explain why. I think that's funny. Second thing we can take with us when we die is our convictions. What do we really believe? Third thing, our character. I was paralyzed playing football for 14 months. 16 doctors told me I'd never get any better. As I started to get better, I was asked to speak. That's how I became a speaker and an author, songwriter. And what I learned from that experience is that adversity is what introduces us to ourselves. No one will ever know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice. And the fourth thing I learned from my adventure into space is that when we landed, really what I have is my memory. Really what all of us can take with us when we die is our memory of whether or not our lives mattered. Did we make a difference?
Yeah.
And I think what draws Jimmy and I together is that law of attraction. We attract what we believe we deserve. And I think you and I have both created subliminally and maybe even on paper the personal relationships we deserve, the professional relationships we deserve, the vacations we deserve, the bucket list experiences we deserve. And then we go about figuring out who we need to identify, who we need to serve so they want to serve us, and figure out the formula to pull them off.
Yeah.
So Jimmy, he epitomizes service before self, and I would like to think that I could throw my self in that same ring.
Well, you were
because the
actually
goal-
given an award for your service, and I mean, I don't want to go. I mean, your list of accomplishments, and again, your intro, your bio speaks for itself. But I mean, it's National Hall of Fame for speakers. It's a service award that less than 250 people. It was given to you by Ronald Reagan, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All these different things, and you have really created a life worth living, and that's one of the things that I like people to get out of this podcast. My sister was listening, and she mentioned that in one of my episodes, I said, look, it's never easy to make these things happen. They require effort. You have to go out and do them, but all the rewards of life come from that. So how do you balance all of the stuff that you do? I mean, you've been an author of 34 books. You've written probably how many songs that have gone gold and whatever else? I mean,
I've got a couple of gold records, but I've written hundreds and hundreds of songs that are so pathetic I wouldn't even share them with my own mother. That's a motivational speech. Just keep writing.
Fair enough.
Wait, I got 2 hits that everybody needs to hear. Had I shot you when I met you, I'd be out of jail by now. And my wife ran off with my best friend, and I'm going to miss him dearly. I'm a deep, inspirational dude.
That's good. Well, they were mostly country songs, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
because I can't write beat it. I can't think like that. I need to have some words. I'm a wordsmith.
When I coached baseball at Bingham, before every game they played the song that you wrote, "The Greatest."
The greatest. Yeah.
Yeah, if you've heard that song by Kenny Rogers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. So, what was the inspiration for that? For like when you're writing your books, when you're writing your songs, where do you pull the inspiration from over and over again to just keep coming up with material and things?
I wrote a story, participated in a speech essay contest when I was 13 years of age. Great inspirational note. My English teacher in junior high saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. It's kind of cool. And she encouraged me to write a story. And my story won the speech essay competition. And it was inspirational. My family put it on a holiday greeting card to send out to relatives and friends. I put it in my first book. I published my first book. I was in the Reagan White House. I took Mrs. Reagan's Just Say No program to all 50 states back in the 80s. So between 83 and 89, I spoke to 6 million teenagers in thousands and thousands of schools. My first book, therefore, was called Getting High, How to Really Do It. It was published in 1982, and I put this story in that book. And then as a primary contributing author to all the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, we put it in volume 1 back in 1993. And in 1997, it was turned into a film at Paramount Studios starring Jack Lemmon.
What's the name of this one?
It's called Puppies for Sale. It's won 22 film festivals so far. It first aired in our backyard in Sundance Film Festival in Park City. I'm really proud of that. And the story is, it's epic. And I came up with that story because on the same day, I saw a young boy walk out of the men's room at the school with crutches on and a big bandage on his leg with his knee bent. And I saw a puppy with its leg bandaged limping down the hall, 2 separate occasions, 2 separate events that happened on the same day. And because I was challenged to write a story, I put those 2 events together and came up with this epic tale. And the same thing with The Greatest. It was my story that the famous songwriter Don Schlitz is the one that put a melody to it, and he wrote a song that I could have never crafted. I give him all the credit. It's so incredible. That little boy in his baseball hat stands in the field with his ball and bat. He says, "I'm the greatest." He throws the ball up, swings, misses, strike 1, throws the ball up, swings, misses, strike 2, throws his ball up, swings, misses, strike 3. He's out. That happened to me a lot. That's happened to you. It's happened to everybody who tried to be a baseball hitter, especially when you're in the backyard just doing it for yourself. Well, with my twisted sense of humor, what makes it an epic song, what makes it a hit song is the hook, the memory. What makes it a hit story, a great short story, is the hook. It's the punchline that you lead up to. So the little kid throws up the ball 3 times, swings, misses, strike 3, he's out. What does he say? "Man, am I a good pitcher." That's funny. That's so profound, and it twists it around to make it something memorable. One of my most famous stories, it was also obviously in one of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. I'm the primary contributing author, as I said. A mother encourages her daughter to come home as soon as school is over. The time comes, the time goes. 30 minutes later, daughter walks in through the front door of her home and her mother scolds her. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick." "You're 30 minutes late." She says, "Oh, Mommy, I walked my friend Sally home. She dropped her doll on the sidewalk. It broke all to pieces. It was awful." Her mother said, so you're late because you stayed to help your friend pick up the pieces of the doll and put it back together again? She said, oh no, Mommy, I didn't know how to fix the doll. I just stayed to help her cry. I turned that into a country song. It's all about the hook. It's all about coming up with the story and figuring out a way to put it into a one-liner that you can hang your hat on and remember the song, remember the story by.
Well, and I think you said an important part is that emotional piece, right? I mean, everybody's had those experiences. And so when you can tie somebody to that and show them that human emotion, that human element of it, I think that's where it really sinks in and becomes memorable to somebody.
Yeah, as a speaker from the stage, you have to be ordinary before you can be extraordinary. And you have these wonderful intros. I have a 3-minute introductory video narrated by Larry King that, makes me look larger than life and shows video clips of going into space and flying fighter jets and, writing gold record songs. But the reality is people don't really care if I've ever succeeded. They want to know, Clark, did you ever fail and fall down?
Yeah.
They don't relate to my perfections if I even have any. They relate to my imperfections. So you have to be ordinary before you're extraordinary. And that's where you are such a king. You are so approachable. You have this ability to connect with people. The law of psychological reciprocity. You're the master of asking people questions about themselves. And once we talk about ourselves, it's created a moral obligation for me to ask you about you and get you to talk about yourself before the conversation ends. So when we connect at that emotional level, the transference of trust takes place on its own, and that's why people choose you instead of just another realtor.
Well, it goes back to nobody cares if you're interested till they know that that you actually care, right? Exactly. And so in the same principle, I always say to people, it doesn't, obviously you want to create a life worth living, an extraordinary life. For me, part of my life mission is to create an extraordinary life that people can look at and be like, okay, that's something I want to shoot for. But in all of that, no one cares how rich you are, successful, cool, whatever it might be, until what they really care about above everything else is how you make them feel when you're with them.
Yeah.
And so creating these experiences, creating opportunities where you can bond together is one of those things I really put a lot of effort towards, to try to create, like, okay, instead of like, we can just sit here and do nothing all night, but wait, what would be a memorable experience where we can experience that together and create a bond going forward?
And most of the memorable experiences I tie into my philosophy towards being a professional speaker. The goal in every relationship, personal, professional, is to have everybody leave saying, I like me best when I'm with you, I want to see you again. I like me best when I'm with you, I want to see you again. And the way we do that from a professional speaker's perspective is to always believe that the goal is to seek to bless, not impress. I teach public speaking at a university. I have for 10 years, taught 5 years at BYU, 3 years at UVU, a couple of years at Westminster in the MBA program, and now I teach currently at the University of Utah on a Monday night, 6 to 9 o'clock. I have guys in there getting their MBAs. I have
cool.
Extraordinary experience. And I teach my students and remind everybody, which Jimmy understands as a professional, is that the goal is not to spend time preparing a speech. The goal is to spend time preparing yourself to speak, living that life on purpose that we talk about. And so what I caution all of my students about, and what I teach to other professional speakers, and I say to you, which I think you already know, is that if my audience members walk out of my speech impressed with me, I blew it. The goal is for them to walk out of my speech impressed with themselves. So I teach an inverted triangle. Why should I listen to you? It's the credibility piece. Have you done it historical? Are you currently doing it? Are you an expert? And then after I've sung my praises and showed my accolades, yeah, I must be ordinary before I can be extraordinary. The second question we must always answer, if it's one-on-one in a sales process, if it's 1 on 10 in a board meeting, if it's 1 on 10,000 in a giant ballroom, a keynote speech, we have to give the answer to the audience members. Why should I listen to you? The credibility piece, but more importantly, can I do it too? It's the possibility piece. Can I do it too, with my weaknesses, with my limitations, and with my strengths, with my history, with my past? Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Let's just get on with right now. What can we do? And then the last question at the bottom of the inverted triangle, the speaker's triangle, is what's the system? How do I get from where I am to where I want to be? Clark, you did this. How do I get to go up into space? What do I have to do? What are the processes of me being chosen as your realtor out of 11 interviews to sell a $5 million home? You already figured that out. But it's the inverted triangle. So we have to follow the system, and the system is always seek to bless, not impress. So people always want to be there for you. Life is a bank. Life is a credit union. You deposit, deposit, deposit. So when it comes time for us to withdraw, we have people and resources that just come out of the woodwork. How may I help you? You have helped me for so many years. You have served my family. You have served our community. You've had dreams for sale for so many people. Now it's our turn to give back. I don't do that for that motivation, but the laws of the universe are in place.
Yeah.
You know, what goes around comes around. Karma's a real deal. I really believe that that's how and why you and I connected so many years ago, and why I've been so fascinated watching your career. And as you grow as this young man, you figured it out, Jimmy. And so many people need to figure it out. And the reality is everybody can figure it out if you want to. In this selfish, self-motivated, self-aggrandizing world, let me just post something on Facebook so I look prettier and more successful than you. Let me go rent this Ferrari and this Rolls Royce and stand in front of somebody else's mansion so you think I'm groovier than you are. That gags me. What we have to do is be authentically real, and the word gets out.
Well, a couple things, I mean, on that point. So when the first time I ever met you, if you recall, I was on a date with one of your neighbors.
I do.
And she's like, I know you love speaking. I was doing stand-up comedy at the time. She's like, you've got to meet my neighbor, Dan Clark. And so I come over. It was like 10:30 at night.
I remember that,
and I'm just embarrassed. I'm like, this guy's going to think we're Looney Tunes. But she was so excited. And you sat there and talked with me for like 2 hours. And who am I? I'm just like this idiot guy on a date with your neighbor, you know? And I was so impressed by that, because it was like you really were interested in me, and you were finding out about what I was wanting to do with my life, and gave me some good direction and things like that. So
you know what? I give credit to my dad. As a young man, he told me to identify the thoroughbreds of your generation and keep in touch. And so even though I played football and baseball at the University of Utah and competed against Jim McMahon at BYU, I made sure that we became friends off the field, and we played golf together so often. And now, you know, he's battling dementia. I wish I could be there for him. But the same thing with you. We create this evaluation system, this subliminal evaluation system. So when we meet somebody, we can tell right out of the chutes if they're authentic, if they're there for you, not for themselves, if they're really a service before self mentality. And I saw that in you as a young man, and you're still a young man. But yeah, it was my pleasure. I think I learned more from you that night than you ever learned from me. And then all of a sudden, look what you're doing. You've invited me to be on your podcast. You're a thoroughbred of your generation, and it's an honor for me to just share time with you.
Well, no, I appreciate it.
It's just correct.
This was one of those.
It's so cool to me.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, this was one of those interviews I was really looking forward to. I first heard you speak probably about 10 years ago as well. It was after I'd met you, but it was shortly after, actually. And it was kind of funny. It was like, oh, there's this guy again. But one of the things you talk about, and you talk about being ordinary, is when you were playing football at the University of Utah, I mean, you were projected first-round draft pick. You had a lot of things going for you. I feel like you're a big guy. And tell us a little bit about the struggle or the challenge you had over, because you basically got partially paralyzed.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit for people, because like sometimes you feel like you're on top of the world and then you just get hammered down, and that's what happened in your situation. I think that would be something that anybody can relate to. So how did you handle that? And then tell us exactly kind of a little bit of how that came about.
You know, I'm a closet philosopher, and people who hit rock bottom, we all will. If you're not failing a few times, it means you're not pushing yourself hard enough.
Yep.
But when someone says I hit rock bottom, what we finally realize is that our rock bottom is really our foundation. How were we raised? What do we believe? If you've been taught you get knocked down 7 times, you get back up 8, that's a pretty solid foundation. Even though you're sad, you're painful, you're going through pain. My foundation was pain is a signal to grow, not to suffer. Once you learn the lesson the pain is teaching you, the pain goes away. So in life, there's no mistakes, only lessons.
By the way, I hope you guys listening to this have got a pen and paper out, because he's throwing out pearl after pearl here. So this one's going to take 2 or 3 listens to get it all. You're so funny.
My foundation is crisis does not make or break the man or woman. It just reveals the true character within. My foundation is the only person you need to be better than is the person you were yesterday. And yet, when I was on the top of my game, biggest, fastest, strongest I'd ever been, projected #1 draft pick, had my letter from Ron Wolf and Al Davis at the Raiders. And in one moment in time, my entire life has changed. Even though I had this foundation that I really didn't rely on because I was just flying high. I'd never hit rock bottom, so I didn't know what rock bottom was. In one day, in one practice, my entire life changed. And just briefly, we were 15 yards apart. Coach blew the whistle. Two of us ran into each other full speed. The only parts of our bodies that made contact, Lyle's helmet crashed into my helmet, violent head-on collision. My right shoulder was smashed into the cutting edge of my fiberglass pads, and we fell to the ground. And when we slammed to the ground, and when Lyle got off of me, my eye drooped. I had lost the speech. I couldn't talk anymore. My right side was paralyzed. My arm dangled helplessly at my side. I compressed my 7th cervical vertebrae. I'd severed what is called the axillary nerve in my right deltoid muscle, and I'd suffered a grade level 2 concussion. If you've seen the movie Concussion, in the late 70s, we didn't have a clue. 1979, we didn't have a clue about concussions. And so that night, basically, I just shook like a leaf. I perspired profusely. I threw up on myself and cried myself to sleep. Bad idea when you have a concussion. Right. So fast forward, I stayed paralyzed for 14 months. I went to 16 of the very best doctors in all of North America. Let me pause. Why would I keep going to doctors? Because you're invincible. And you are invincible. And no matter what, you're invincible. Back to my foundation. Get knocked down 7 times, get back up 8. Wow, I've been hurt before. I got to find somebody who knows how to help me get better. Mm-hmm. And that's why I have a lot of opinion about bedside manner. When a doctor says you have cancer and we'll give you 6 months, I'm like, I would rip his lips off. He's not God. Nobody knows. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, given 6 months to live, and he lived for 6.5 years. Great quality of life. So it's about the belief. And 3 couplets, if you want to take this note. Some things are true whether you believe them or not. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but nobody's entitled to the wrong facts, and you should never believe everything that you think. If you spend your life wondering whether or not your glass is half empty or half full, you've missed the point. It's refillable. Thinking positively or thinking negatively doesn't fill up the glass. The pouring does. One of my favorite quotes I've written: it's easier to act your way into positive thinking than it is to think your way into positive action. It's not the sugar that makes the tea sweet, it's the stirring, it's the process. That's my foundation, and all of a sudden I'm paralyzed. Whoa! And I hit rock bottom, and I thought I was depressed. Very important for your listeners and your viewers to understand this. I thought I was depressed. Now, we know people in this podcast in real time who have been clinically diagnosed as being depressed. They have a chemical imbalance and they need medication. We need to give them non-judgmental friendship and unconditional love. We need to be there for them. But most people who say I'm depressed are not depressed. They're flippantly and recklessly using that word as a catch-all phrase. And as soon as a physician in a position to give you medication hears that, they prescribe this. Do you realize in Utah, I was the keynote speaker 2 years in a row for the Utah Pharmacists Association. So I was privy to inside information on my conference call. What do I need to know about what's going on in Utah? You know what I learned? 400%. Remember that, 400%. Physicians in Utah prescribe Prozac 400% more than any other physician in any of the other states.
Wow.
You cannot tell me in our beautiful state, snowing today in our gorgeous mountains, no one can convince me that we have 400% more depressed people in Utah than any other state in the U.S. Are you kidding me? I could take you to whatever exit you want to go to in New Jersey, and you're going to, thank God you live in Orem. Come on.
Well, it is kind of like it's,
what's up?
I believe the same thing. It's like you said, you don't want to dismiss the people that actually have a chemical imbalance of depression. But I think it's one of those things. It's like you can call yourself whatever you want, but I think a lot of times people use it as an excuse to play down, right?
You got it.
It's like, well, I'm depressed, I can't do it. Or like, oh, I don't feel good today. It's like most of the time, the people that are really going out and achieving mass things in their life, a lot of days, it's like the difference, like, this Dan Young that I had on the podcast recently said, a lot of people say like, well, you should do what you love, always do what you love. And it's like, well, no, sometimes you got to do the stuff you don't love. Sometimes you got to just go to work, suck it up, and then get yourself in a position where you do love what you're doing no matter what.
And they call it work for a reason.
Right.
And if you're not failing a few times, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. We've got to accept that failure is such an exciting exciting thing. And in the context that losing hurts worse than winning feels good. You got to learn from your mistakes. But here's what happened to me, to your point. I hit rock bottom. My life spiraled out of control. I thought I was depressed. Why? Because I confused who I was with what I did. I thought I was a football player when in reality, that's just what I did. It's not who I am as a man. And when we identify ourselves in terms of what we do instead of who we are, we become a human doing instead of a human being. Unacceptable of significance is what we seek. So based on my foundation, you know why I was able to recover? It's because I realized that there was a giant difference between being depressed and being discouraged. There's a huge difference between being depressed and being disappointed and being sad. And if you're depressed and you use that as an excuse and you over-medicate or self-medicate, opiate addictions and deaths right now are at the highest level in the country here in Utah. Are you kidding me? And if we think we have to medicate ourselves because we're discouraged or disappointed or sad, we're fooling ourselves. When you're disappointed, discouraged, or sad, what you need is a power of a dream. You need to surround yourself with people who remind you you cannot quit. It's a league rule. What Jimmy teaches all of us is we become the average of the 5 people we associate with the most, which means if you hang around with 5 broke people, you're going to become the 6th. If you want to learn how to make more money, hang around with people who make more money than you. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. If you hang around with 5 whining, negative, woe me, you don't understand people, you're going to become the 6th. When you put a hard-to-catch horse in the same field with an easy-to-catch horse, you usually end up with 2 hard-to-catch horses. When you put a healthy child in the same room with a sick child, most of the time you end up with 2 sick children. Moral of the story, to be disciplined, healthy, and significant, we must be willing to pay any price and travel any distance to associate with extraordinary human beings.
I love that.
And what's an extraordinary human being? Someone who triggers more passion, creativity, and imagination, which is the secret. The difference between a hit songwriter and a lousy songwriter is passion, creativity, and imagination. Difference between an extraordinary, significant realtor and an average one who does it part-time and wonders why Jimmy gets all the big deals is passion, creativity, and imagination. The difference between a Hall of Fame speaker, a New York Times best-selling author, and someone who just wants to be is passion, creativity, and imagination. The answers are inside of us. The answers are in the box. So if we hang around with, if we become the average of the 5 people we associate with the most, we better choose our friends wisely, use our time productively, and make sure we do not die with our music still in us, which is the final thing I learned from my adventure into space. Too many will die with their music still in them. And after my opportunity to see the curvature of the earth, I will never do that. I refuse to die with my music still in me.
So somebody listening to this right now, obviously, I love just listening to you. I could sit here and just listen all day. Usually I talk more on the podcast, but today I'm here learning as much as my audience, and I appreciate that. So one of the things that, if somebody's listening to this right now, they're like, okay, this sounds great. I'm feeling motivated right now. What are some simple steps they can take if they're not living their most passionate life, or they feel like they're not, on this path that's leading them to this great life that they want or everybody desires? What are some things they can do to get there?
Okay. In medicine, we learned that prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. Prescription before diagnosis is malpractice, which means we have all been conditioned to understand that the goal is to seek the answers to questions. We ask a better question, we get a better answer. You ask great questions. My purpose in life, especially as a professional speaker, as an author, is not just to seek answers to questions, but to take the time to question the answers. That's step number 1. If you don't like what you're attracting, change what's attracting it.
And what do you mean by that?
Meaning that my life sucks. I'm not getting what I want. I don't have the same excitement that Jimmy Rex is creating. I don't get to do the things that Dan Clark does. I've made over $1 million a year. Multiply that 20 years in a row. I've lived the life that I dream of, even though I didn't make my dream of being a professional football and baseball star come true. What I learned is that my injury was the best thing that ever happened to me. And don't misunderstand me. My accident isn't one of the best things that ever happened to me, but who I became as a man and what I learned about resiliency and what I learned about the significance of a dream and what I learned about passion, creativity, and imagination, what I learned about prioritizing as a result of going through my injury, as a result of going through this setback, clearly makes it one of the best things that ever happened to me. So when you ask for a step-by-step process, these are mindset steps that we must put in place before we can take action. But the reason why I stayed paralyzed for 14 months from my football injury is because I was asking the wrong questions, and that's what's holding most people back from making their dreams come true. I was asking the doctors how to get better when I should have been asking myself why. Once we answer why, figuring out the how to is pretty simple. So for a classic example, for all of you sassy, sexy, beautiful, inside and out, wonderful, talented women out there who are looking for the perfect man, he's right here in my family room.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, that's where I'm going right now. Because I'm happily married, and I want him to understand this and all of you to understand this too. If every man watching this podcast wakes up every morning and answers one simple question, why am I married? There's a really good chance that we could figure out what we have to do and how to stay married for the next 1 hour. And if we can answer why am I married and how do I stay happily married for 1 hour, I can do that again. So now I'm happily married for 2 hours in a row. Who would have thought? This is a shock for Californians. I know that. They celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary on the 3rd week of marriage because they hear it's such an extraordinary, celebration, and they know they'll never get there. So let's just do it right now. What we have to understand is that you put 2 hours back to back to 4 hours, suddenly you are happily married for 1 week. We have a 50% divorce rate in America right now. 64% divorce rate in second marriages, 72% divorce rate in third marriages, 90% divorce rate in fourth marriages. A geographic relocation doesn't solve anything. 50% of those folks looking for Mr. Right are getting it dead wrong, and the same thing is true on the other side of the gender equation. So let's figure out a way to question the answers. The answer is relationships are falling apart. The answer is third generation businesses, third generation owned businesses, family owned businesses that make it to the third generation, over 90% of them fail and go bankrupt. Why? It's because the third generation are so far removed from the hard work that it took to create the business in the first place, they feel entitled. That's not a slam to the millennials. We just need to catch on that it's still about hard work. It's still about putting in your time. This morning I woke up at 5 a.m. I work out. I have more accomplished by 7:30 in the morning when most of the folks wake up in the world than most. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying there's a way to figure out a way to cram more time into your day. And if you wake up 30 minutes earlier than you usually do, and you do that every day for a year, you've added 7 1/2 full working days to your life. If you sleep 8 hours a day, if you sleep for 8 hours and you live to be 60, you have actually slept 1/3 of your life away, and that ain't going to happen to me.
Wow.
I get off in 4.5 to 5 hours of sleep. Sure, I have to shoot whiskey at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon to get fired up. But other than that, as soon as they legalize medicinal marijuana, I know I only probably need 2 hours of sleep. But until that miracle happens, I've got to do what I can do by eating right, exercising, keeping me alive and exciting to be around so people want to have me on their podcast and don't have to say anything because I'm so freaking verbose.
You know what? A wise man once told me that know when to shut up and just pay attention and learn. So
yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
sorry, I've talked way too much.
No, it's great. It's great. Well, this has been one of my favorite sit-downs I've ever had.
You're such a dude.
Dan, you're the best.
You honor me.
We're going to have you on again one day because this is awesome.
And I'm going to have you on my radio show, voiceamerica.com, the Influencers channel. You got to tune in. And, like me on Facebook. My friends flip me so much crap. Clark, for being an international celebrity, why do you only have 11 friends on Facebook? Please help me.
It's that whole millennial thing. We'll get some of them to help you, the ones that know how to work.
Yeah, please.
Well, thanks again, man. I appreciate you
Dan
so much.
Clark. Wait, he's not letting me suck up. DanClark.com. It's my website.
The Art of Significance, by the way, is his most popular book. I've read it. It's amazing.
Go on Amazon. I need the money.
We're going to tie links to all this on the show notes, but you're such a riot. I love it. Dan Clark, Just Google him. You can find anything that you want to
He's
find.
such a stud. Jimmy Rex. I would write a song about him just for the record, but I don't know what rhymes with stud muffin hunk of burning love. And until I do, I will reserve that song for His Majesty.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Dad.
You're a dude, man. Thanks, bro.